Hi, this is Gil. So, we're going to talk about the biggest difference today versus in the 80s. In the 80s, like, I put a little list right here about, I'm going to talk about Santa Ana, the house that we lived in Santa Ana. Specifically, the address is 3102 South Townsend Street, Santa Ana. I lived there as a kid. My dad bought the house for like less than $100,000 back then at the time. And then a brand new car was like, I don't think a brand new car was even $8,000 back then. I know you're able to buy new cars for less than that. But of course, some good ones would cost maybe 10 at the most. But if I can remember, but I do know that they did have some pretty expensive cars. Mercedes, you remember Mercedes and BMWs? They actually cost as much as $50,000 if I remember in those days, in the 80s. Gasoline was 75 cents a gallon if I remember about that time. But then again, also at the same time, the wages were like $3 minimum wage. I know $3.35 an hour for the minimum wage at the time. I know my dad had a job like working to do with cement. My dad had a pretty good job, and I don't remember exactly what he was making, but I know that it was probably about $10 an hour, maybe. At the time, he was making good money at the time. If I remember, I don't know what my mom was making, but I know my dad was making pretty decent money, like probably not more than 10. I wouldn't know exactly. But in those days, in the 70s and 80s, I know my dad had bought a really nice console TV. It was a 25-inch console TV. And I distinctively remember him paying $1,000 for this really nice console TV. But back in the day, an average TV was a 19-inch color TV with a remote. And if I remember, in the early 80s, it was like in the $300 to $400 range. If you wanted a good brand, about $400. And I distinctively remember my dad paying $400 for this 19-inch remote control TV in 1981. Specifically remember that, or I distinctively remember that. Paid $400 for that TV. But that is with a job with the minimum wage of $3 an hour. My dad was probably making $10 because he used to work as like to do with cement. I don't know what he was doing at that specific time, but it was only a handful of people that were able to do VCRs and stuff. Like my dad how I wish my dad would have bought us a VCR back in our day, but back in that early 80s, I know VCRs were probably typically like $300 for the average one. And then, like only a handful of people would have a stereo system lying around in the house. And a nice one was $500. We never owned one. My dad had those little shelfers. I don't know what he paid for them back then, but my dad never really bought a stereo. And then video game system with the Atari. My dad bought us an Atari in the 80s. And we paid $140 for the Atari, and then you figure it had a few games, and we probably spent about $200. But that was $1981, and the minimum wage was $3 an hour at the time. But you gotta also remember, like in the 80s, like the housing was like less than $100,000. Well, that specific house, when my dad got the house in Santa Ana in 1976 or something like that, I remember hearing something about $63,000 for that 3102 South Townsend Street house in Santa Ana. We're one of the most expensive cities in today's times. And then, so you kind of figure that my dad in those days, when he bought that really fancy console TV for $1,000, it's like at the time, in today's money, that would be equivalent to like $3,500 in today's money. But you know, you were able to buy a brand new car for about $8,000, something really nice. I mean, it was not a cheap car either back then. I mean, back then you were able to buy a nice used one for about $1,000. You were able to buy like a 5, 6 year old used car for about $1,000. You know, like yeah, I mean, back in those days. But to buy that, so to buy an average TV at the wages that my dad was making, and it was actually a good job. It was a good job back then. But if you were gonna buy a $350 standard color TV at $3 an hour, you have to work about 100 hours to get it. You had to work like 2 or 3 weeks to buy that TV. I mean, same thing with the VCR. You had to work like 2 weeks to buy that VCR, or 2 weeks to buy the stereo or something. And I was working full time too. So if I can remember back in those days, you know, like these were like the things that everybody wanted, everybody coveted. I mean, like the first thing that we would always typically see when we walk in someone's house is a TV. Everybody had a TV. Most everybody had a typical TV was like one of these, a 19-inch color TV, and sometimes they had remotes and sometimes they didn't. I mean, the average family had a TV like this, average family. But I mean, only a handful had something more fancier, or some people didn't even have a TV at all, or they had black and white TVs and stuff. But and only a handful of families had a VCR. I mean, only a handful were able to do VCRs. You know, I mean, not a lot of people had VCRs. You know, and still another only a handful of people would do stereos like this as well. I mean. But of course, you know, I think a lot of people typically had a shelfer. I mean, those would probably cost like $200 or $300. But if you wanted something really fancy, only a handful of people had a fancy stereo, because they would be $500 to $1,000 back in the days, you know. And then you know, and some people had Ataris, you know, like. For the luxury, for some people who had luxury in life, they had Ataris too. I mean, well, apparently we had Atari, I mean, in our days. So, yeah. And back then, you know, like, my dad bought us an Atari for like $140, and I would imagine his wages was $10 an hour working in a construction job, you know, like, it was considered good pay back then. That was big money back then, you know. So you figure my dad had to work like 2 days, had to work 2 full days to be able to buy this Atari, and that was with a good job too. But if we were making minimum wage, we would have to work how many hours? We would have to work like, let me see, like 80 hours or 70. We had to work 2 weeks to buy that Atari, to buy this Atari. Yeah. Yeah, working at McDonald's, you had to work at least 60 to 80 hours. You had to work at least 2 weeks full time at McDonald's to buy one of these, with a few games and get a few games with it. I mean, you had to work 2 full weeks, full time back in the day. But now, I mean, so that was the trend in the days, you know, that was the trend in the old days. I mean, like, there was like the average trend that family wanted to have, you know, like, the average family had a color TV, 19-inch color TV. Telling. And now let's talk about today, 2024. Let's talk about today. Now, if you were going to try to copy that today, if we wanted to try to copy 80s today, well, it's not anything like it, you know, right now. I mean, so yeah, you know what? In today's time, that same specific house that sold for less than $100,000 in the 70s decade, this same house, I looked it up on Google, or I looked it up on Zillow, and I found that the same house sold for, I think, more than $1 million recently. It recently sold. The 3102 South Townsend Street, it sold for more than $1 million or something. It's that same house. And in today's times, a new car costs, like, the average price of a car is like $40,000, you know, like $40,000. And then gasoline is $4.50. But however, the wages is like these days in California, the wages is $20 an hour now these days. I mean, but in today's times, we like that the typical house, and when I walk in a typical house, I mean, the first thing I'm gonna see is gonna be a big screen TV. It's gonna be one of those, you know, everybody has one of those big screen TVs. These LCD TVs, or what do you call them? The TVs that we have today. I mean, like the OLED or whatever that is. I mean the you know, flat panel TV. Everybody has one. Like the typical TV that everybody has is gonna be like a big one. It's gonna be like what, 60 inch, 70 inch, and it seems to me, from what I've been seeing in the past several years, of what I observed, and what I observed is like that average house is going to have one of those 60, 70 inch TVs for their main TVs. And I think people will typically pay $1,000 for those, for something nice, because people like the good ones, you know, like. But these days you could buy a TV for less than $1,000. I mean, like, and they're gonna be like even better. They're gonna be even better than the best TVs back then. But and then the average house is not gonna have anything else really. I mean, the TV is the only thing that we really see. And when we walk into a house, because it's not like the '80s decade, not like an '80s decade where some people, like every house would have a 19-inch TV, and some houses had some families had VCRs, and some families had stereo systems, and all that stuff. But in today's times, we don't see stereo systems in the house. We don't see people use. We don't see any kind of stereo systems in the house. I mean, these days, do we ever see one? I don't know. You tell. I would like you guys to tell me if you guys actually still have any sort of stereo system. Well, for people who may have a stereo system, it's gonna actually be just like a Bluetooth speaker. I mean, that's what the stereo systems of today look like. I mean, they just do Bluetooth like this one right here, or they're just gonna use their little sound bars. I mean, that's what people do. They do these Bluetooth speakers. They don't have things like this anymore. I mean, they don't do things like this anymore. I mean, it's only Bluetooth speakers that we see in these days. and then an average house might probably have, some average houses might have a PlayStation 5 or Xbox or something, but not a lot of people that I've been to. But the average house is going to have just one of those 70-inch TVs, or like a Bluetooth speaker. That's what I typically see in today's times. So, I mean, and then the number one thing that I'm going to see in every house I walk in is tablets and phones. Everybody has a phone and tablets. So, yeah, I mean, so you figure, I mean, like, what do we spend our money on these days in terms of electronics and stuff? What do we spend our money in today's times versus the 80s? You know, like, you know, in my days, like when I first started working and stuff, I wanted to save for, like, I mean, I wanted to like have a TV of my own, and I wanted my own VCR. And of course, in my days, I had my camcorder. I bought my camcorder, and I wanted my Genesis, and then my stereo. I wanted my stereo, and I mean, I wanted to buy things like that. But now in today's times, you know, like, it's like what I observed my kids specifically. If my kids had money to buy something, like to buy anything for like for entertainment, the first thing that comes to my mind, or the first thing that I see in my kids, is probably maybe like a computer or a tablet, some kind of maybe a laptop, like an Apple laptop or something, or maybe like the Switch. But that's about it. I mean, well, the Switch, or, I mean, in today's times, well, they don't have to buy stereos, or they don't have to buy TVs or anything. Well, everybody has a TV, and they don't have to buy VCRs and stuff. I mean, because we could do everything on their phones, and everybody has a phone. I mean, and they don't even have to do phones, because, you know, we provide the phones for my kids. I mean, we provide them. Like it's kind of typical for families of the moms and dads to provide phones. Typically. I mean, I don't know how many of you like actually how do you guys deal with your kids? You guys do you guys actually provide the phone as for the plans that you have for your phone? Because the kids they play everything on their phones. So yeah. So anyway, so you know what? I can imagine if I was gonna teleport from the '80s to today, well, what would I picture? What I would like? What kind of things that I like in today's times? Well, I think the things that I would find that I would think that I would find interesting in today's times, it would be cameras. I mean, it would be like the GoPro and stuff. I mean, GoPros and stuff. Like, and then if I was gonna want to save money, if I was gonna teleport my 16-year-old self over here to 2024 to live here, and I now had to work to buy these things, well, I'd probably be buying like maybe like the latest game system. Probably, that's what I would be guessing. I would. Well, the phone, I wouldn't even have to be worrying about the phone because I mean I know my parents would give me a phone. But anyway, I mean, if I was 16 in today's times while observing it with my kids, I mean, what do they look at buying? Like when my kids get some money for allowance or so, what's the first thing they go to? I mean, well, they like to go to the how we call it. Well, I mean, like they like to play Genshin Impact or something. When it comes to things like that, it's gonna be like, it's gonna be things like coins or gems or whatever they play. They buy these little things for their Genshin Impact games or whatever. Like they buy these coins or that type of thing. It's like they spend money on the internet. I mean, my kids, but sometimes in my kid might want to buy her own computer, or like she's actually wanting to buy a new computer, like a new laptop. She wants to save up for one, but right now she's like working on it right now. I mean, she would like one, like a laptop, a new Apple MacBook or something like that. And then the little one, my other kid, I think, what does she like? I mean, she's pretty happy with her phone and stuff. She's happy with the phone. I mean, I have not observed her liking anything. I mean, like what a 16-year-old would typically buy. I mean, so yeah, I mean, but one thing I could say, if say my like 16-year-old kids were in the '80s, what I would typically observe an '80s kid wanting, that they would want a stereo system in their room. They would want a little shelfer system with some cassettes and record albums, and they would and it would be a luxury for them to have their own TV in their room. It would be a luxury for them. Some kids, a typical 16-year-old would want a boom box, would want to have a boom box or a shelf stereo system. Or I mean, the most common thing was an Atari. I mean, back in the day, I mean, if I remember, and of course, it was ultimate luxury for them to have a VCR in the room. That was the ultimate luxury. And then TV. But if I remember when I was 16 years old, I was like really into my Atari, and then I had my Atari computer. I was kind of like into that. I was into like the video games and things like that. And my stereo, I loved my stereo. Those are the two typical things that I liked when I was young, when I was 16 years old. But in today's times, my kids, they have an entirely different interest in today's time, because I mean, it's not even in the things that I said about what I like is not even in their vocabulary, because they're in the world of the phones, the the phones that we have today, and tablets and the internet. They're in the world of the internet, so it's very different. So yeah, I mean, in my days, I mean, yeah. So I mean, that's how today is very different as compared to before. I mean, so if we're gonna talk about like the prices of new cars and houses, like houses is like 10 times more expensive today than it was back then. And then new cars these days is like about 5 times more expensive in today's time. Gasoline is like 5 times more expensive, while the wages is roughly like 5 times higher. So I mean, apparently housing is not. I mean, wages is not keeping up with the prices of houses. Apparently, but at least we get the perk in today's times that the prices of electronics are a lot cheaper than they were back then. Like because yeah. So there you have it. I mean, so that's how it is in today's time. So yeah, all right. Well, then that's what I observed. Okay, well, I hope you liked the video about the big differences between today and back then. All right. See you on the next one.